There's not really a lot.
Animated titties?
I know, amazing, right?
We're here for another episode of Nerd Legion. We return to our 80s fantasy marathon where we go through every single fantasy movie released over the entire decade of the 1980s. Got a bunch of bangers coming up. We're in 1981 right now, and we have about 50 movies remaining. So it's going to be a while till we finish.
I think it's going to get a lot better after this. After this one, I wasn't a big fan. We'll get into it. After this one, I think it's going to get a lot better as we move into the earlier 80s and the mid 80s. I think there's a lot of really fun stuff there. Some stuff I in particular am quite excited about. But like I said before, somebody had to do this, right? The movies were out there. They demanded to be watched. They demanded to be discussed at length, of course, in sequence. At some point in the history of mankind, this had to happen, and why not us? Why not?
Nobody
now?
else is stupid enough to do this.
I wasn't gonna say it, but that's kind of the main reason. Yeah.
But we do have fun. We do have fun discussing them, and
have fun.
Like I said in the last one, so we did skip Dragonslayer. That was my bad. We did skip Dragonslayer in the chronological order. It should have been after Clash of the Titans, but we will do that one next. But the next,
I saw all the big Dragonslayer fans on TikTok really came out to give it to you. It was a slaughter in the comments. I saw. Don't forget about Dragonslayer.
It was. But I mean, the next kind of batch of movies that we're going to be watching: Dragonslayer, Ator the Fighting Eagle, Sorceress, the Beastmaster, Conan the Barbarian, and the Dark Crystal. Are all bangers. So I'm actually really looking forward to this next run of 1980s movies, because if you guys haven't seen these, there's definitely some all-time classics in there. So it should be a good time.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's so much personality and charm and questionable special effects and questionable acting choices and scenes but it's great. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah. And before we get to that, DoA, we did have some Star Wars news drop, and I'm gonna, as the ultimate Star Wars fan, I'm gonna check your pulse on this one. So first off, DoA, it is rumored that Kathleen Kennedy will be retiring at the end of 2025, potentially ending her reign of terror over the Star Wars intellectual property.
I hesitate to make a strong statement about this. And I know that sounds really lame, but here's why. Because she's clearly a very talented producer and was for many, many years, right? She seemed to be the chosen one. You and I were talking about this, and she did seem to be the one that was picked to lead Lucasfilm and all that.
By George Lucas.
No doubt she is a talented individual at producing. That said, man, on the creative front, have there been some, shall we say, misses over the last 10 years or so now? And it's very opaque at the end of the day as far as like who ultimately is the most to blame for that. But the thing is, at the end of the day, she's the one in charge, right? So you kind of have to take that blame, right? Regardless of where it came from the most. You are the final say so, right, with this stuff. So I think a lot of Star Wars fans that don't like the way that the IP has gone are going to be happy about it. My take on it is, will anything even change? Maybe, maybe not. Who knows? I can't really be super excited about this because I don't know if it's going to accomplish anything,
Right. I think for those people who are excited,
I just don't know.
For those people who are excited, I think that the logical people that would be put in charge are Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni. And as far as we know, they've actually had a significant degree of creative control, and that has led to some really terrible content, honestly. Like
it's been up and down, right? I mean, Dave Filoni's had a lot of really good stuff. But there were misses in there too, right? So I don't know. Like I said, I have no idea if anything's even going to change. And you raise a good point that, we may have already kind of gotten a taste of what a difference in leadership would be.
I just don't think it's going to do anything.
Yeah, so my position on it is the same as it's always been, where I just want Star Wars to be freed to the masses, right? Where anyone can make a Star Wars thing, that's kind of been like part of the community for a long time, in that George Lucas has always been very supportive of people making fan films, fan content for Star Wars. And so, why not truly free it, right? Um, I don't we'd get a lot of terrible stuff, but I think we'd have a higher chance of getting something truly great.
I think you need a visionary leader to actively, be the creative head of this. And it feels
All
like
right,
because Dave
I'll do
Filoni
it.
was already in that position, it hasn't improved anything. So I don't really see how this makes anything better. And speaking
I'll,
of better
like I said,
Star
I'll do it.
Wars,
I'll do it.
you'll do
If
it?
all they have
Okay.
to do is ask. All they have to do, I'm in LA. All you have to do is ask. I can drive over.
There you go. Speaking of better Star Wars, Andor season 2 got a trailer. Now, both of us are
Did.
big fans of Andor. Think it's great. The trailer, however, was not great and was weird.
Yeah, I don't know the musical artist that's sang the song, but it kind of sounded like if you asked AI to write a Bob Dylan song, it would kind of sound like this. But more than anything, it was tonally very, very different from Andor season one. This was not the tone or trailer of a slow burn spy thriller. This felt very much like the direction of, again, Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh, quirky spy heroes blowing things up. Ooh,
Here's
Section
your
30.
generic rock and roll
So
music.
I did not like the trailer. I did not like the editing. I didn't like the music. I didn't
The
like the
music
tone that
was
they were trying to
very
convey.
weird. It was
It was
very
not.
weird.
It wasn't good. But maybe if you hear that song in a vacuum, it's better. I don't know. It was not good for that trailer. But I will say at the end of the day that the biggest problem that Andor season one had from a non-storytelling standpoint is that not a lot of people watched it, right? And this is a trailer that was clearly designed like from the ground up to be a trailer that says, "Hey, this is a good show. Hey, people who didn't watch season one, come watch." Right? This was clearly a trailer to get new viewers in, because I think it's accurate to make an assumption that people like us that like season one are going to watch regardless of how the trailers look. So I think
Yeah.
this was a
And
smart move on their part to at least try. I think they could have done a better job with trying, but I don't disagree with their attempt to try to fully focus on getting new viewers in. Now, my last thing I'll say about it is that my one concern is that the tone of the show actually does match the trailer, in which case I'm gonna call it getting Section 31, but hopefully that's not the case. I don't think that is the case. I think
I think it's
think
gonna be
it's
fun.
gonna be good, but I think this trailer was just purely made to bring in new viewers, and they did it in
Yeah.
kind of a weird way.
And in terms of the music, the song's by Steve Earle, who's a country music legend. I'm a Steve Earle fan,
Oh,
and even I hated this music in this trailer.
I
Which
stand by my AI Bob Dylan comment. Sorry, Steve.
so I'm a Steve Earle fan, and I was
Oh,
weirded out by his use in this, and also maybe taking rock country isn't the best, genre alignment
like
for Andor. But I just
when they
laugh at
had a
I laugh at
pilot
all
for
the
that.
critic quotes, Doa, because honestly, a lot of you guys have said when we said, "Hey, go watch Skeleton Crew," you said, "I'm not getting burned by Star Wars garbage again. I'm not trusting them for no reason." And for on this on this trailer, it's a bunch of critic quotes where Disney's like, "Trust me, bro, this one's good.
Yeah,
Just
the
just
greatest
watch it.
show
This one's
ever.
actually good. This one's good, guys. We're not trolling." But it's sad that it has come to that with Star Wars,
Yeah,
that we need a million critic quotes for a piece of Star Wars IP to
I
draw
know.
in people, because even they know they must have received much of the same feedback we did, which is that we're not just watching it because it's Star Wars. It's been trashed for too long. Now we just don't trust Disney Star Wars, which is fair.
Totally, totally. Like I said, I have my opinion on it that I'll try everything Star Wars just because again I want to find the good stuff, and for me like going through some of the bad stuff isn't it's not the end of the world. Whatever, I can make jokes about it online at least. But for the people out there that again, if you want to just not engage with Star Wars anymore, that's fine. But if you say you're a Star Wars fan and you're not even giving stuff like this a chance, then it's like, all right, well, describe to me how exactly fandom works then, because it's clearly we have.
I support the people who are fans who use their brains to be discerning and wait.
Yes.
I mean, here's the thing, DoA. I will say this. I mean, you know this. You were telling me, hey, Monty, Andor's good. And I said, and I resisted watching it for a while until a lot of those really good reviews came out. And then I watched it and I said, I am pleasantly surprised by how good this show is, because I didn't want to watch it because of what they had done to Star Wars. So I feel those people, you know what I mean? It's not that I don't enjoy the Star Wars universe. It's that I too was burned so many times that hearing Andor was good just wasn't enough until I heard it was good enough times to like push me over the edge. You know what I mean?
Let's really get to the bottom of this. Hearing it was good from me wasn't good enough for you to watch
from one person. But yes, you know, you thought Ahsoka was mid instead of bad.
One.
So
yeah, it was mid.
It was not. It was bad. It was actively bad.
You just have a big old Thrawn boner, and that one.
It's called a throner.
My mistake. My mistake. And it made your throner flaccid.
It did.
That upsets you.
It did.
I can't unhear that.
It was bad though. It was very bad. And the whole Ezra Bridger story was bad. And like, this is what makes me concerned about Dave Filoni, is that we've got some Filoni auto-fillating in Ahsoka, where we have to introduce all of his characters from his old shows that I don't give a flying fuck about, because I wasn't a 12-year-old Zoomer when I watched the Clone Wars animated series. So it doesn't fill me with encouragement.
Yeah, and I mean that show could have done a lot to, introduce those characters in a way that brought in new fans of those characters too, So instead of just kind of relying on, hey, it's those characters from that thing, we just talked about that same thing happening with the Captain America film, right? Where there was so much of a burden of having seen the previous stuff to, truly understand it. But well, don't worry, Ahsoka season 2 is coming someday. and the Mandalorian and Grogu movie titled The Mandalorian and Grogu is coming out at some point. It's like, you couldn't think of a better name for that. This is desperation. Really, they really are in desperation mode with Star Wars, aren't they? Right?
Yes.
Making this trailer for Andor that's like, please watch, it's good, we promise. Here's some rock music and funny.
Here's some Steve Earle to get all the country people invested in the story.
Explosions and streaming, and Andor smiles at the end and he looks smarmy. Please watch. And then it's like, the Mandalorian and Grogu movie, what are we going to call it? We just have to call it Mandalorian and Grogu, because that's what people are going to be like, oh, Mandalorian and Grogu. I like those characters, I think, so I'll watch this. Instead of calling it an actual movie title. It's desperation mode over at Star Wars. It's this is our Empire Strikes Back right now. We thought it was the prequel era, but no, that was just the end of the OT, really, when it comes to Star Wars fandom. That we are full on in Empire mode, right? And
what they need, DoA, is a new hope for Star Wars. That's what they need.
They do. We need in this metaphor, it is really the Star Wars IP itself that has been frozen in carbonite and taken captive by vile, ruthless gangsters.
Are you comparing Kathleen Kennedy to Jabba the Hutt? I'm not saying it's not a good comparison.
It's a whole cast of characters. It's a whole cast of characters.
Who's Jabba in your metaphor? I'm just curious. Which one is Jabba?
I don't want to name names, but I did hear Dave Filoni once say, "May Jabba no bother." So I'll let you guess, but. So the question is, who is going to come in and be our Princess Leia, our Luke, to save us, right? It's not going to be Rian Johnson. Yeah, no way. Who else? Who else is going to make a Star Wars film? Taika Waititi was going to make a Star Wars film.
Oh God!
Right?
Yeah.
Sure. I do like his work,
sure,
but
yeah.
I don't know if I'd like his Star Wars work.
Exactly.
I'd be worried it would, become like a Thor film. I don't know who can save Star Wars.
Comment below. Anyway, let's talk about let's go back in time to a time when Star Wars was still good, DoA. That time was 1981,
Yeah,
where this was an era, DoA, where there was actually no bad Star Wars. As difficult as that is to believe, there was only good Star Wars.
Oh, you're wrong. Actually, you're mistaken in that assumption because by this time the Star Wars Holiday Special had already aired. So,
that's true. Good point.
Yeah, so there was already in this nascent age of Star Wars. There was already bad Star Wars. It's kind of been part of the fandom since the very beginning. Really.
They wasted no time in making bad Star Wars.
We had 1 year of only good Star Wars, and that was the year 1977 when A New Hope came out. It was 1978 already, I believe, when the holiday special aired. So we got about maybe not even 365 days of good Star Wars, of only good Star Wars.
That's very funny.
Yeah.
So anyway, when there was mostly good Star Wars,
sure.
we have Heavy Metal, which was an ambitious project, animation project that is now a pretty major, I would say, cult film, and is beloved by many people to this day. Before we get into that, though, guys, we do have to say, if you don't want to have a stench like Loch-Nar's evil surrounding you, you should check out our sponsor, Mando. Mando offers men's deodorant and grooming products, including stick deodorant, which you're probably used to using, or spray-on deodorant, cream tube deodorant, which is kind of like a lotion that you can rub anywhere, which is actually what I've been using for the most part these days. Body wash, bar soap, basically anything. And it was created by a doctor who saw firsthand how normal body odor is being misdiagnosed and mistreated. And this is a product that will stop the body odor from forming in the first place, which means that it's not an antiperspirant, so it doesn't have aluminum or anything that stops you from perspiring, which I very much appreciate. And you can try it with the starter pack, which will help us out. Mando starter pack is perfect for new customers. It comes with a solid stick deodorant, cream tube deodorant, 2 free products of your choice, like a mini body wash and deodorant wipes, and free shipping. As a special for you guys, our listeners, new customers get $5 off a starter pack with our exclusive code. That equates to over 40% off your starter pack using code NERD at shopmando.com. shopmando.com. Please, the best way to support us is to support our sponsors. So check it out. Check it out.
That's right. You don't want to smell like the inside of a tauntaun, do you? They don't even smell good on the outside.
Yeah, they don't. And if you were sleeping inside a tauntaun, get their deodorant wipes, because those will freshen you up immediately if you're in a place where you may not have access to bathing facilities, like camping.
Yeah, to scrape off the viscera and gore after your night inside of a tauntaun. Those wipes will do that.
Fantastic. All right, let's talk about some heavy metal. DoA.
All right.
You had a very strong negative reaction to heavy metal, which I found interesting.
I don't know. I guess I just don't get it. I guess I just don't get the appeal. And I understand that at the time it came out, the animation was pretty good, right? I'm sure it was. But like everything in the movie is just so like dirty and ugly and gross. And like I like the music, but I can't enjoy it because of this like stupid movie happening, the whole time.
All right.
So I didn't love it. I don't really understand the appeal all that much. But maybe you'll help me find it. Maybe you'll help me figure it out in this next conversation.
I will. So if you guys don't know the background to heavy metal, this is based off of kind of a graphic novel periodical where a bunch of different artists and writers would submit these stories. So it was a magazine that you could get. It is very famous. I think it was on break for a little bit, but it's back now. It's been going for decades. And this was their attempt to kind of take some of their stories that had been successful, take them into these animated vignettes. And even if you don't like this version, I think that the legacy of heavy metal is very important because it actually led directly into other animated anthologies and was very inspirational, I think, for a lot of other projects. I think it's flawed, but I do think it's very ambitious. And I think you have to remember the context of heavy metal being made, which is that in 1981, this would have been really revolutionary in terms of its tone because heavy metal, the magazine, was famous for their kind of like softcore erotica, heavy violence, darker themes, right? This was very much a comic book that was geared at older teenagers or adults. And it was, I think, bold of them to put this much violence and this much kind of sex in an animated film in the early 80s, because at this time in the West, this would have been considered a medium that was primarily for children. I think Japan was definitely more advanced in this time, and certainly by the time the 90s rolled around and we get, you know, some of the anime films like Akira, Ninja Scroll, and like really a lot of the really violent ones.
Yeah.
Ghost in the Shell, yeah. That are classics to this day. Like Heavy Metal really was a trailblazer for that. And you know, as far as the animation goes, I think it's interesting. Gerald Potterton, who directed this, was doing the Yellow Submarine. He's one of the main animators on Yellow Submarine, the Beatles movie, which has a very distinct look to it. Heavy Metal uses a lot of rotoscoping and kind of different techniques and also different art styles, which I think keeps it kind of fresh. Is it juvenile? Sure. Is it kind of boring in terms of the frame story? Yeah. Am I in love with all of the individual segments? No. But I mean, I see its appeal and I see its influence, and it's weird. It's watching this is very weird because I think the quality oscillates really quickly from very interesting and very cool to like really bad, and it just kind of does that over and over and over again. But you know, I see why people, especially if they watch this film as a teenager or as a young adult, would be very heavily inspired by this.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, the people that would be most affected by it, you know, probably are the people, like you said, that were at that age at the time and just were shocked, right? And it left this like memory, you know, that they couldn't escape from, you know, basically, because of course there's not really a lot.
Animated titties.
I know, amazing, right? But like the thing, you bring up Japan, right? And so sure, yeah, Japan had more adult themes in their animation earlier on, but they also managed to do it with better storytelling too, which you know is my thing, where it's like, okay, well, sure, you want to have this type of content in there. Why can't you have good storytelling along with it, right? Where this did just seem so like boring.
But that's, you know, that's not what
like,
what Heavy Metal is. Like that's the thing, is it's supposed to be pulpy. Like this is very intentionally pulpy, and I think you just have to deal with that fact. Now you may not like it, and it's not the deepest thing ever, but I do think that it was very deliberately created to be pulpy. But you can see so many things were inspired by some of these shorts. You know, like the Harry Canyon story, I think is pretty clearly inspirational of The Fifth Element. Like it helped inspire The Fifth Element and like Bruce Willis's character in that. You know, a lot of directors have kind of fought over the ability to do a remake of Heavy Metal or the next iteration of the Heavy Metal series, because it does offer an interesting blank canvas to do a lot of different, you know, potential things.
Well, it's interesting too, because there was a Heavy Metal 2000 that came out too, and I remember when that came out, and I remember it just kind of coming and going, and nobody really talking about it, you know. So I don't know if there's as much interest in it now. I guess if we're doing one every 20 years or so, we're kind of ripe for another one at this point. But I just don't. We live in a world where now where there just isn't really anything shocking anymore, right? We covered the last season of The Boys. You know, The Boys goes way more extreme than anything in Heavy Metal on a regular basis. So if you just can't get by on shock value anymore in North America, at least, because just nothing is shocking anymore at this point, you know?
Yeah, but like I said, you have to remember where this came from and how different this was on
get
its release.
I try to, I'm sure I can appreciate it from a historical standpoint, right? Where I do understand that this is, you know, like you said, revolutionary at the time and all that, and I'm sure had a big impression on a lot of people. But watching it now in 2025, it for the first time for me, it just seemed lame, you know?
Well,
I was like mildly interested in one of the stories, and then the rest of it, I was just like, oh my gosh, is this still going? Can it just? I was so bored during this whole thing.
I wasn't bored. You know, if anything, I think the pacing was too fast a lot of the time. But I think, DoA, what's interesting about this too is that the legend of Heavy Metal, I think was very much alive during the 80s because it was released in 81 and it was shown on premium TV, so HBO in the 80s and 90s, right? This is where this was kind of done in on repeats, right? But you couldn't really watch this unless you had a bootleg version because the official version of Heavy Metal wasn't released for 15 years after 1981, the VHS release. So there was no way to actually have a legit home copy of this. And the reason why that happened with Heavy Metal is because they couldn't get the licensing for the music to release it on VHS. So it just kind of stalled in hell forever. So I think if you first saw this in the 80s or caught it on HBO when it happened to be on, this became like a folk legend. Like, have you seen this? Like, it's shocking, this animated film that's doing all this violence and sex. And so I think the word of mouth and the mystique around this really grew because of how unavailable it was, right?
Yeah, I mean, and you know, that's why, like, although I didn't watch it, like, I do have to respect the soft spot that a lot of people have for it, because I think for me, something like the Star Wars Holiday Special would be in a similar category, right? Where it was this thing that you know, if you're a Star Wars fan, it's really insane, right? And there are no official copies of it. You have to track down bootleg versions of it. It is very much of like, have you heard of this thing? Did you know it exists? You know, that kind of thing. So I can respect it on that level, right? I can respect it for being significant in its time, you know? And if someone liked it and it had that big effect on them, who am I to tell them, you know, that they were wrong to have those feelings and wrong to enjoy it now? Of course I can't do that. But I think if you, again, like if you watch in the context I did, I just didn't enjoy it. I don't know, what can you say?
I find it just interesting that the people who are fascinated by this, including famous directors, because part of the legacy of Heavy Metal has been that David Fincher, who's probably one of the greatest living directors, has repeatedly tried to revive this project. He was supposed to direct a new one with Paramount. Paramount dropped the project, possibly because it was too edgy. And David Fincher then just spent like a decade afterwards trying to get this made. And what it eventually turned into was Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix. So he kind of got his, you know, to produce an animated series, an animated anthology. But the direct legacy of Heavy Metal is people who are interested in heavy metal making Love, Death, and Robots, which is a show that I really enjoy.
I mean, I think that's also a strike against it for me too. Is we all know at this point, I don't like anthologies. I feel like it's just not a good way to tell stories. You know, you're kind of trying to get me to watch like an extended trailer for something else, is what it feels like to me. So I also have that you know, bias coming into it too. I guess you could say that predisposed you know, feeling of not liking anthologies. So that doesn't help when Heavy Metal is an anthology, you know. And
it's really funny to hear you say that, because one of my favorite pieces of literature is The 1001 Nights, which is like the classic anthology with a frame narrative, which means, you know,
like
it's a you know, this contains a frame narrative, and a frame narrative is what, you know, the classic example is The 1001 Nights, where Sherazade is telling stories to prevent herself from being killed. Right? Where she leaves it on a cliffhanger so she doesn't get executed the next day, so that she can tell continue telling the story, and she tells story after story after story. And I love The 1001 Nights. So for me, having an anthology, even though the frame narrative here, which I'm sure we'll get to, is kind of hilarious, where this astronaut drives a Corvette from space, parks, melts immediately to Lochnar, the evilest evil orb to ever evil. And then Lochnar just orb-splains his entire history across dimensions and planets to a terrified little girl in a villain monologue saying he's going to kill her, but he has to show her all this stuff first for reasons that we don't know, instead of just killing her.
Yeah, see, it's not even a good framework for this, right? Because
it's a terrible frame narrative, to be clear. Like, it's really bad.
You know, in the end, in spoiler alert, in the end, she ends up being like the person to defeat him, and it's like, well, I guess you shouldn't have told her all those stupid stories, then, huh? Maybe you could have left out the dumb noir thing.
He was orb-splaining, okay?
Yeah, I guess so. That's what he gets, right? But so just like they couldn't even have like come up with a good frame to put around it, right? They couldn't even find a way to make some sort of loose cohesion to this that didn't seem totally stupid. And
it did feel forced because they were adapting stories from graphic novels in the Heavy Metal magazine into this, and they needed the frame narrative to stitch it all together. So they were like, how do we do this? Let's just make an ultimately evil green orb who's just does stuff, and that way we can have the stories revolve around that.
Now, can I talk about the only one I kind of enjoyed?
Sure.
Like and I when I say enjoy, I mean it in the loosest sense of the word. But the one where John Candy plays the nerd that becomes like a big buff dude or something like that.
I loved John Candy voicing a ripped black dude. That was really fun.
He was kind of purple. Let's be fair. But
no hair. Big.
There was no way I was going to walk around this place with my dork hanging out.
it was but yeah, I think that was the intent to communicate that sort of thing. But anyway, I digress. That one, because it was sort of like it was kind of a satirical take on the whole John Carter thing, where this nobody goes to another land and is suddenly this big superhero, and but in this case he constantly messes things up, just kind of lucks into everything, and I thought they were gonna have him die at the end, but turns out everything's fine, And that was like kind of mildly entertaining. That one was like
I
okay,
I enjoyed that one.
Chuckled slightly in that. I was like,
I enjoyed that one because it's like a teenage male fantasy where the nerd gets taken to the world, ends up being this huge, ripped hero who then goes and saves this beautiful woman who would never have a chance with on Earth, ends up, falling in love with this life. But I mean, I just laughed so hard at certain moments in this, including when they're trying to go into the Queen's palace and steal the Lochnar and they're creeping around in the dark. He ends up just like running directly into the Queen's breasts and fondling them. And then she immediately, as any, of course, male fantasy goes, she immediately just wants to have sex with him and does so while his associates steal the almighty powerful artifact. It's just funny. Like it's juvenile, but it's funny. And there is truth to what happened, to this kind of male fantasy that I find hilarious.
Yeah, for sure. And it is.
I just love how he's just in the dark and he's just like fondling her because she's just, of course, no, she's just standing naked in the darkness, waiting for thieves to come steal her Lochnar.
I mean, that's what I do in that night. Just stand there waiting.
Have you had any erotic encounters with strangers trying to steal your stuff yet?
Not yet, but there's always a chance when you live in Los Angeles. But it's like I said, it is clearly satire, and I think that's the thing is like a lot of this is dark comedy, right? A lot of this is meant to be funny, both in its level of extremes and also just its writing, right? It's sort of meant to be darkly comedic through the whole time too. And I think there are some hits in that little story, but I think the vast majority of everything else is like a miss. Like, I mean, like although I did like the line, the rising moon climaxes our love den.
The rising moon climaxes our love den. It is a sign.
Yes, a sign. I had no idea what she was talking about.
That was one where I'm gonna have to use on my next anniversary. We'll see how it goes. I'll update you. Yep.
Okay, I expect an update now.
You're welcome. Yeah. I did have the note. My stories are almost over, and dash maybe my favorite line in the film because I thought it was gonna be over soon. It wasn't. It's still went on for a bit.
I think my favorite line in the film was from the noir taxi driver Harry Canyon one, where he just says, "I was given this broad, the stars and stripes forever."
Somehow this dame got to me.
And I was given this broad, the stars and stripes forever.
Yeah, it was very noir. But like that was really a thing in the 80s and 90s though in general. Is that like they wanted to portray all the cities as dirty and as dangerous and vile as possible. You know, and I feel like that lasted up through the 90s too. Because even you look
To
at
be
like
fair, that's how New York was in the 80s. So I
sure,
understand.
I've heard that. I've heard that, right? But there was this sort of real sort of grim view of the future, you know, that seemed to sort of pervade this stuff too.
You know, I lived in New York in the 2000s, so I wasn't there for that era of New York history. But from my conversations with people who were, many New
Mhm.
Yorkers who were, I mean, they described it as, I mean, it was awful. And so I
Oh
think
yeah.
if you were in the 80s, making 70s and 80s and making this film, you would look at that and you could say, okay, well, it's pretty bad now, but how could we make it even worse, right?
Right.
And you know, that vignette also comes from a short comic by Mobius, who's a very famous French comic artist who, you know, famously worked with Jodorowsky, Alejandro Jodorowsky on The Incal, which is fantastic, and you guys should go check that out. But he's a legendary comic artist, and it was heavily modified, as I understand. I haven't read that particular graphic novel of his, but it was heavily modified. But you could really see the kind of neo-noir take that Mobius often has in his work, and how this would be very inspirational to sci-fi dystopian ideas that came later, including, like I said, Fifth Element, Blade Runner.
Yeah, for sure.
These movies must have been influenced, maybe not by heavy metal, but by this genre of pulpy graphic novel, because they have all the fingerprints all over it.
I mean, heavy metal definitely wasn't the only thing, you know,
Sure.
doing this sort of thing at the time too, right? There were a lot of really, really bad science fiction movies that were doing similar things too. Um, but you know, I am curious. I'm curious. I did read about directors, you know, saying that it influenced them, but I don't know how pervasive that really was. I doubt that this film alone had such a profound impact on everything, right? Um, I mean, right? I don't think so.
I mean, I don't know. I don't, I just see this genre definitely, and like I think it's just a product of its era that is really interesting. That's why I'm compelled by it.
Okay. I think
Right.
that's fair. I will say I'm glad that I saw it because, you know, it is a classic. It is something that, you know, if you're gonna be, you know, thinking about and watching a lot of this stuff, you have to have that frame of reference of having seen it, I think. But, you know, for me in particular, it just had a lot of strikes against it, right? The anthology thing, yeah, I didn't just get into anything. Like some parts of it were funny, but most were just kind of, you know, dumb. And like it's not that I have something against like sophomorish humor, right? Or dumb humor. I like dumb humor a lot, but this just seemed there just didn't really seem to be anything clever about it. It like nothing surprised me, you know? And I don't know, is that am I just like too like
Look,
desensitized and all this kind of stuff? Is it
I think you just have
nothing
to.
surprised me. I felt like I could predict every single scene.
Yeah, but I just don't think it's about that. I think that the appeal of this is you know exactly what you're getting. It nails the tone that it's going for. It nails the
Sure.
genre that it's going for. And you're just along for the ride of its ridiculousness. Like the Tarna story, which is the last story that it tells. I'm just dying and I'm just dying laughing because she's just wearing this hilarious string bikini and she's just the setup. The setup to her going to battle is just so funny because they call on her. She's taking her time flying around on her pterodactyl, and it takes like a minute for her to just fly around. Then she's naked, swims to the statue, and slowly puts on her string bikini armor, which has like
Right.
a single pauldron to protect her and some greaves, you know, on her shins. And then she's ready to go to battle, of course. And this is how it works with her magic sword that she powers up with the statue. It's just funny. I mean, it's just like it's kind of the epitome of this genre.
Yeah, and again, I think it is meant to sort of like make fun of a lot of the other stuff in the fantasy genre where, you know, armor for women in fantasy is traditionally not looked terribly effective. So I think this is kind of,
but this is like even not effective for that.
Right. And that's the point, right? Is that's the point they're making, I think, is that, you know, it's ridiculous, right? And so they're just pushing that to the extreme. But yeah, I don't know. I have no other really thing to add to that except I just didn't enjoy it. I don't know. I'm sorry. It just wasn't my thing. What can I say?
Also,
it did not strike a chord with me.
This film is clearly not intended to be viewed sober, guys. I don't know what to tell you, but if you're going to watch this, you know, consider altering your perception because you're going to have a much better time.
If your movie needs that, I don't know what to tell you.
No, there's nothing wrong with that though. Some things are just intended for that, and it's just dandy. You know, it's just fine. But I would not raw dog Heavy Metal a second time.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be watching it a second time.
I did watch it sober, but obviously I was thinking to myself, this is probably better not sober.
That is, I would agree with that. I think that helps a lot of, you know, bad movies be slightly less bad. Sure.
No, I think it's just the visuals of it and kind of getting lost in it because on its own, you know, I think it really stands up in good ways because you can get lost in some of those moments. And we haven't talked about the soundtrack yet, which is integral to this film.
Yeah, sure, it's a lot of good songs.
Yeah, so it's a lot of classic rock, not heavy metal, to be clear, not heavy metal. You know, you wouldn't consider Blue Oyster Cult or Cheap Trick or Devo.
And they have Black Sabbath in there though.
Heavy metal, right? Yeah, Black Sabbath, sure, Black Sabbath, but you know, Journey,
metal in there.
There's some, but for the most part, it's not. It's like classic rock from the 70s and 80s. And the way that it uses that music is often extremely effective, especially with the visuals. And I think that as a music video product, it's pretty interesting.
I think that's what it kind of aspires to be more than anything, right? Is a journey, is a trip, all that kind of stuff too. But I just feel like you could do it better, you know?
Well, it's just like Yellow Submarine by the Beatles, man. Look, it's a classic, but that is obviously intended to be consumed on LSD. And you're doing it wrong if you're not doing it that way. That's how it is.
I guess I did it wrong. I guess I did. I did heavy metal wrong. I'm sorry, everybody. If you're a big heavy metal fan, I did it wrong. No regrets.
But look, I think Yellow Submarine is a better movie than this, right?
More cohesive.
It's more cohesive.
Funny to say about Yellow Submarine, but yeah, it is. But it is.
But I don't think the Beatles were like, we're making this for sober people. They weren't.
Fair enough. Like I said, I don't think I'm the target demographic for this. I watched it because it's a cult classic. There's my take on it. Like I said, I will not begrudge anyone for liking it, because obviously, there's things to like, but it just was not my thing.
Yeah, and look, it's worse than other animated anthologies. It's a million times worse than Love, Death, and Robots. But you could argue, because of David Fincher's inspiration, we wouldn't have Love, Death, and Robots without this. So I'm willing to pay the price.
Sure. I mean, I'm willing to watch it once, to talk about it at least. But I think, I feel, I don't know. I just don't like anthologies. Like, if I try to decide for myself, did I like Heavy Metal or Secret Level worse? I definitely think Secret Level had higher highs, but I think Secret Level also had lower lows too.
It did.
So I can't even like say that was better than Heavy Metal, or that's just it, right? I mean, the Star Wars anthologies that came out, those again, higher highs, lower lows. This one was just at least
Animatrix.
It was totally consistent. Oh, the Animatrix, yeah. I mean, there were some really great ones in there, but there were also some real duds too, But yeah, man, I forgot about the Animatrix. Yeah.
Maybe we should watch that at some point.
Maybe.
Let's do an anthology series where we watch every animated anthology.
No, please. What's the best anthology?
It's probably Love, Death, and Robots. Some of the ones in Love, Death, and Robots are really good.
I haven't watched the whole thing. I've watched some of them, but not all of them.
I really enjoy that.
Leave a comment below. What's the best anthology film or series, I guess?
I mean, I think Sunny's Edge in the first season, that thing is so good. I just want an entire series of Sunny's Edge in Love, Death, and Robots.
I don't remember that one. I don't remember which one it was. Like I said,
that's the one where it's them fighting, but they're psychically linked to the monsters. So it's like a monster fight arena. It's incredibly good.
Yeah.
It's incredibly good.
Oh, that was a better one. Yeah, I'll give you that. Sure. All right.
But yeah, I mean, even just some of the animation, like Jabaro in season 3, which I mean, the animation is absolutely incredible. So I don't know. I'm a big fan of Love, Death, and Robots. Sure, it's got bad ones, but it's the product is always going to be uneven. I just really enjoy the high highs and the thought experiments that go into it.
I think with an anthology like that too, where you have like different people making different, episodes, then you have room for higher highs and lower lows. Where this one is kind of everything's kind of made by the same people, right? So whether they weren't originally in the comics, I would imagine it was the same team working on all of them in the movie, at least for Heavy Metal.
I think they produced a lot of these. It was made pretty quickly, as I understand it, and the production was sped up because they could produce these concurrently. So they all had different directors and stuff. So I do think it has, it has some, there's some level of truth to what you're saying, but it feels like a little bit more of a mixed bag.
Okay.
But it was obviously designed around the frame narrative, so you have less freedom for sure.
Oh, I do like the ship in the part with like the stoner aliens. I do like their ship. That's kind of
the one that looks like the piece of Murakami art.
It looks like a modern design.
It looks like the Japanese artist Murakami. I'm pretty sure it was either designed by him or was inspired by him. So
either way, that's something that you could see on like a folder, somebody's I don't know, like a 90s folder now, a 90s folder now. It's an you could see an emoji set of that.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right. Well, not much more to say about Heavy Metal.
Not a ton.
I give it a 4.5 out of 10. DoA. I mean, I don't love this thing. I think it's not I think it's like on the low end of mid. I just appreciate it for its influence. That's all.
I would give it a 3 out of 10, and the 3 is only because I recognize its historical value.
Oh, come on! Some of the animation is good. The music is good. There's good moments to this.
I just don't think it holds up. I mean, and the music being good has nothing to do with the movie. That music was just good before and after the movie anyway. So I don't think
the
you can be like,
utilization of the soundtrack that's good, which not everything does well.
Sure. But I'm not giving it any points for that. 3 out of 10. Come at me, heavy metal fans.
All right. Well, next week, guys, we're gonna go back a little bit to get Dragonslayer, which we missed, which was actually a highly influential film from the 80s, again on a number of directors. So it should be pretty fun. I'm really excited to do this one. I have never seen this movie, but I have heard about it, and I'm curious to finally watch it.
Yeah, I don't believe I've seen it either, but we watched a trailer for it after the last week's episode when we were chatting about it, and clearly there was a lot of budget for this, and it's got a lot of interesting actors in it. I'm excited to see it. We'll see how it goes.
And just to tease you guys, the dragons in the movies were direct influence on George R.R. Martin. So there's like a lot of modern influence from this one. So if you guys want to watch along, we'll see you then.